Welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, where men go from good to great in their life and love. Listen, now more than ever, our world needs strong, courageous, and compassionate men, because we believe that when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. And this movement is called Dad Nation, but ultimately this is for the wives, the children, and the generations to come, because we believe that every wife and child deserves a father who is pursuing greatness. I'm your host, Mitchell Osmond, and I'm so grateful and I'm humbled that you've chosen to spend your most precious resource, which is your time, with me today. All right, so listen, today we're going to be talking about how to win with money, how to get out of debt, how to create financial freedom, and be prepared for your retirement. Now, this is part 2 of 2. So if you haven't heard part 1 yet, I want you to scroll back a couple episodes to episode 11 on how to get out of debt and become financially secure. And this is where we talked about how to play defense when it comes to playing the game of money. All right, we talked about how to manage your debt, what order to how to organize your debts, and how to structure them to pay them off quickest, and how to save an emergency fund, and all those different things. So it was a great time. Now this is part 2. So today we're going to be talking about playing offense. And because in any offense position, you know, when you're playing offense, you're rushing forward, you're advancing the team with an intention to score and win the game. And this is what we're trying to do with money as well. Move your money forward, grow it, and win the game in order to retire well or become financially free. Now, why are we talking about this? Because as we've been learning in life, in marriage, and in parenting, everything is connected. Right? I love the biopsychosocial spiritual model that Melanie and Seth talked about last week from Anatomy of Us. And if you listen to that, you know that everything is connected. Finances are such a huge part of what we do in our lives. And finance is no different. It's intermingled, like I said, with every part of who we are. And as we discussed in part 1, financial problems are one of the leading causes of divorces in America. So it's an important discussion that deserves our time and attention, okay? So today, I'm going to give you the 5 moves that you need to make in order to really kind of win this battle, if you will. I've been using this vernacular because for me, it makes it easier to remember the steps to save and to invest and become financially free. And these, like I said, are a continuation of this financial battle plan from a couple weeks ago, where we learned how to get out of debt and all that stuff. So also, at the end of this episode, I'm going to give you my 5 money principles that we live by and that I believe that every couple should adopt if financial and relational peace is something that you want to achieve. Now, I don't know how long this episode is going to end up being because there's a lot of content, but I'm hoping to get it all in under 60 minutes. That's always sort of my benchmark. There's a ton of info, and this is going to be dense, so you may want to save this episode or download it to reference it as you plan your own journey. And full disclosure, there's going to be a lot of terminology. There's going to be a lot of information, so I'm going to read a lot of this from my notes. So if you're watching on YouTube, maybe I'm not going to do as great with looking at the camera, so I apologize. But I just want to get all the terminology and all the numbers right. So, and you know what? Listen, real talk here. I had a crazy busy week, and so I'm feeling a little tired, but you know what? I'm showing up. I'm here to give you my best. So I just appreciate and welcome your grace as we get through this episode together. But you know what? In any case, this is going to be super valuable for you. So let's dive in. And before we start talking about this, I want to give an official disclaimer, right? That I am not a licensed financial advisor. And anything you learn in this podcast or the notes that you download, this is not to be considered official financial advice. This is simply my opinion. And while I'm sharing personal knowledge and experience, that's of things that have worked for my family, and I will not be held liable for the results of any financial decisions you make after hearing this podcast. Sound good? Sound good. All right, so the first move is to visualize the victory. Okay, visualize the victory. In his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey dedicated an entire chapter to this idea of beginning with the end in mind. And the premise of the whole chapter is that the most successful and effective people in the world share this common trait. They reverse engineer their goals. They reverse engineer their lives. They ask themselves, what do I want my future to look like? And then they create the steps that are needed to make in order in which to take them. Most importantly, they have the consistency and the grit to follow through and execute and see their goals come to fruition. Now, I cannot overstate this, okay? If you do not think about and plan for your future, your retirement, for your older years, you are headed into a future that will not look like what you want it to, okay? But why is it that we ignore it? Why do we not acknowledge and not take the steps we need to take to prepare for our retirement? It's because it isn't pressing, right? It's not in our face. It's not nagging you for another juice box or doesn't need his diapers changed, right? In his book, Money, Master the Game, Tony Robbins puts these numbers into perspective when he writes this. He says, here's the new reality. There's a 50% chance that among married couples, at least one spouse will live to the age of 92. And there's a 25% chance that one of them will live to 97. Now, we are closing in on a life expectancy of 100 years old pretty quick with modern healthcare, modern science, and medication. And with longer lives, we expect longer, much longer years of retirement. So somebody retiring today at age 65 is expected to live 85 years or longer. That's 20 plus years of retirement. And that's the average. Many will live longer and have more like 30 years of retirement. And like I referenced this in the last episode, but so if you're 30 years old, for example, take a moment to think about the first 30 years of your life. All the childhood memories, elementary school, junior high, high school, college, marriage, all that kind of stuff. If you retire at 65 and you live to be 95, that's 3 decades is how long you have to live while being unemployed, right? So we got to have money to be able to live for those last 30 years. And if you read the statistics on the elderly and poverty and with inflation and how people aren't prepared, it's pretty alarming, you guys. It's very alarming, okay? There was a survey conducted by Mass Mutual where they asked baby boomers what their greatest fear was. Get this, it wasn't death, terrorism, or sickness. The number one fear of baby boomers was outliving their savings. So you need to save and invest your money to create a nest egg that you can draw from when you retire. Or else you'll be forced to live on Social Security or old age pension or whatever the situation is for the country you live in. But according to the Social Security website, this is in the US, the monthly maximum federal amounts for 2023 are $914 for an eligible individual and $1,371 for an eligible individual with an eligible spouse, and $458 for an essential person. That's as of 2023. If you're a married couple, okay, that equates to $16,453 per year. So $16,500 per year. Can you live off of 16 grand a year? Think again, okay? So it's not enough to simply save money and stuff it in your mattress or in the bank either, right? Because due to inflation, a lot of people don't realize this, but due to inflation, your money actually decreases over time, right? So for example, $1.76, right? That's $1.75. In 2000 is only worth $1 today in 2024, sorry. But to put that into context, let's give it a larger number. So $176,000 in 2000 is only worth $100,000 today as of 2024. This means, like I said, that our money decreases in value over time because of inflation. So we must think of ways not just to save, but to multiply our money. So investing is essential for financially healthy retirement, okay? John Chauvin is a professor of economics in the Stanford University, and he writes this: it is not realistic to finance a 30-year retirement with 30 years of work. You can't expect to put 10% of your income aside and then finance a retirement that's just as long. It doesn't really work out that way, okay? So if y'all have been saving money, which is great, well, we're going to talk about how to take that money then and put it into a secure, safe, consistent fund so that it can begin to work for you. So for now, here's an exercise I want you to do, okay? I went to Google a retirement calculator. Now, I'm going to put one in the show notes below for you from Wealth Simple, which is super easy and simple to use. But you can Google, lots of different financial companies have these, but it's a free tool that many websites have to allow you to reverse engineer how much money you will need. So you can simply input what you would like your monthly income to be, and it will calculate how much money you'll need to save for your nest egg in order to pay out each month in retirement. So be careful, because this is a bit of an eye-opener. Now, there's a couple things to consider. Remember that when you retire, your expenses won't be as high, because hopefully by then you won't have a mortgage payment. You probably won't have a car payment, but you'll want to factor things like you'll want to travel and food and electricity, healthcare, all that stuff. So your monthly expenses won't be as much, but you do want to be able to factor in, do you want to have money for traveling and doing the things that you want to do? So like I said, I put in a link in the show notes below for Wealth Simple's free online retirement calculator, but just Google anyone, it'll work. It'll give you an idea, and it'll say, in order to have this much money, by 2065 or whatever, monthly, this is how much you have to save, and it'll give you a pretty clear number, which is pretty cool. So that's number one, okay? Calculate the money. Think about what you want your retirement to look like. Visualize that victory. Visualize what it's going to look like. Now, moving on to number two is to learn the enemy's language, all right? And this is essentially I'm going to explain some of the basic finance terminology, because, listen, I don't know about you, but it seems like there's some type of inner circle elite group of financial trolls just creating ridiculous financial acronyms for the sole purpose of keeping us confused and in the dark. Right? Part of me wonders if the financial world is unnecessarily complicated in hopes that people will remain financially illiterate and need to purchase the services of these ethereal finance gurus who are really pulling the strings. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes it does feel like there are so many options and so much information that it can actually be paralyzing. I don't know about you, but I felt that way. And it stopped me from really digging into this for many years, because it was all just so confusing. Have you ever heard of the phrase paralysis by analysis? Well, this is a thing, and it happens all the time in personal finance, right? Because we think we're gonna dig in and we're gonna figure out these things and figure out where we're gonna put our money, and we just get overwhelmed and we freeze because we don't want to think about it. And then before you know it, a year passes by, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years pass by, and then you haven't done anything, right? And then you're about to retire and you don't have the money that you need. But here's the reality. It's your responsibility as a man to protect, to provide, and to preside in your family, okay? When it comes to money, it's critical that we know what we're talking about and we become financially literate. But don't worry, that's what this episode is all about, and I'm going to do my best to help you understand some of the basic terms. So here's a list of terms that maybe you've heard words around this and you're not quite sure what they are. But in order to get better at playing the game of offense, you need to understand what some of these are, okay? And there's so much more than this, my friends, but for the sake of this podcast episode, this is what I'm going to get into. Okay, so number one, the term stocks. What are stocks? Well, a stock is also known as equity, right? So units of stock are also called shares. So owning shares or stocks in a company simply means that you are entitled to a portion of the company's assets and profits equal to how much stock or shares that you own. So for example, if I bought Apple shares and stocks first when they went public in December of 1980, I would have bought them for $22 per share. Now, if I spent $50,000 on Apple stock back then, I'd own a considerable amount more than if I bought them today, because they're worth $172 per share. I'm not at the time of last time I looked up at it when I wrote, it was $172 per share. It's probably a lot more than that now, but they went from $22 a share in 1980 all the way to $172 a share. So that's a huge amount of growth. So obviously, if I buy $5,000 or $50,000 and then they jump up to 172, you see what I mean? I can sell them and make a lot more money. So when the company grows and profits, the share prices increase. And when you own that stock and the price increases, you can sell them for a profit, like I just said. So in our example, if I bought in 1980 and I would have spent $50,000 to get, that would have given me 2,272 shares, okay? Just over 2,200. But then if I sold that same stock today, those 2,200 shares would be worth $392,000. Actually, that exact price would have been $392,215.36. So essentially, I would have spent $50,000 back in 1980, and I would have sold them for $392,000. That's not a bad deal. And of course, the flip side to this equation is that stock picking requires an intense amount of research and studying and a high amount of risk, right? So back in 1980, nobody knew if Apple was going to be a monster like it is today. So there's a risk. Starbucks, Amazon, Facebook, Google, all these companies back then, to really be an early adopter, you would have been taking a bit of a risk. So give yourself a break if you didn't jump on the train earlier. But any given factor then it can affect the stock price of a single company. So for example, if you got a big company and the CEO does something shady, or even just like extramarital affairs, or like just crazy things like that can cause the stock price to just plummet. Then your money's worth nothing, right? So I do not recommend stock picking. You may have heard that phrase before, or putting all your eggs in one basket by buying stocks from one company only. And so essentially when you hear like New York Stock Exchange, Toronto Stock Exchange, all those other stock exchanges, that's where these stocks are being traded. Okay, so that's what a stock is. Now we're going to talk about a stock exchange. Right? You may have heard that term like I just used, the New York Stock Exchange. Now, according to Investopedia, the New York Stock Exchange is an exchange located in New York City that is the largest equities-based exchange in the world based on the total market capitalization of its listed securities. Now, I want you to just think about the New York Stock Exchange like the world's biggest holding or trading place for a bunch of these stocks, or basically a bunch of these companies. This is where a lot of the stocks, mutual funds, and all those things get traded. So for example, Ford Motor Company stock is traded and tracked at the New York Stock Exchange. So if I buy a bunch of Ford Motor stock and it drops or increases in value, it's because of what has happened to the value of the stock in the stock exchange and the New York Stock Exchange. So like I said, for example, if the CEO of Ford has a heart attack, this is probably going to cause traders to mass sell and ultimately tank the stock price of Ford. Then the value of my Ford stock goes way down. And there's many kinds of stock exchanges across the world. So for example, NASDAQ, Toronto Stock Exchange, Shanghai Stock Exchange, lots and lots of them. But think about it, it's just a place where people, this just exchange of stocks, and they go up, they go down. It's actually super volatile, really intense. Okay, so that's what a stock exchange is. Think about it when you see movies and stuff. If you've ever seen Wolf of Wall Street, these guys are traders in that sense. So now we've got a stock exchange. Now we're going to move on to the stock index. Okay, you may have heard of the term S&P 500 when you're watching financial news, or the Dow, or the Russell. And you may have heard people say, just buy the S&P and you're good, or just buy an index fund. Right, well, what does that even mean? What is a stock index? And according to Stash.com, an index is a grouping of company stocks that measures changes in the stock market, the broader stock market, or a sector of the stock market, right? So remember we talked about individual stocks, or individual companies. The S&P or the stock indexes group companies together and track their performance. So some examples of famous ones are the Dow Jones Industrial Average, or it's often referred to the Dow. And it includes 30 of the largest companies in the US. Another one is, as I mentioned, the S&P 500 index. Now, the S&P 500 index is made up of 500 of the largest companies in the US, hence the term 500, including names such as the insurance company Allstate, home construction and refurbishing company called Home Depot, and Walmart, the largest retailer in the world. These companies are included in the S&P 500. So when you buy an S&P index fund, which we're going to get into a little bit later, like I said, you aren't buying a stock, you're buying a fraction or a slice of the pie of all of those 500 companies in that group. And so if they do well, you own a fraction of all those companies. If they do well, you do well. Does that make sense? So according to Investopedia, the average annualized return since its inception in 1928 through to December 31st, 2022 is 9.82%. Now, the average annualized return since adopting 500 stocks into the index in 1957 through to December 31st, 2022 is 10.15%. I'm sorry, but you cannot beat that track record. 10% return over, 70 years? This is why buying index funds are so beneficial, which, again, we're going to get into that a little bit later. Just remember that, okay? The NASDAQ is an example of another index, which is a high concentration. Now, the NASDAQ has a high concentration of tech stocks, technology stocks. And this consists of stocks of more than 3,200 companies, okay? Now we're going to talk about mutual funds. I know you've heard this phrase before. We all have, unless you've been living in a cave for the last 30 years. But mutual funds are simply bundles of assets that are put together by financial managers that can be split up and sold for fractions of the cost. So there's multiple people buying pieces of one giant financial pie, if you will, that is made up of different slices of other pies or other companies. So if your mutual fund has U.S. equities, Canadian equities, and international equities, it has groupings of stocks from U.S. companies, Canadian companies, and international companies, right? Does that make sense so far? So a typical mutual fund might have a combination of assets in it between stocks, bonds, etc. For a mutual fund, it might be made up of the following. It might be made up of 65% stocks, 30% bonds, and 5% cash or money market funds. Now, why are mutual funds good? They're great. Mutual funds are great options for people who don't have a lot of capital to purchase big investments, or it's also good for people who don't have the time or money to research or study the best companies to invest in, aka 99.5% of the world. We don't have time to be studying and tracking and understanding what's going on, and also to keep up on that. So buying mutual funds, which is like a little sliver of all of them, is a much better strategy. So let me explain mutual funds by using an analogy of chocolate, which is my personal favorite thing in the world. Let's say there was a box of 12 chocolates, okay? Now this box of 12 chocolates cost you $40. So 4 friends decide to buy some, but they only have $10 each. So the shopkeeper says, okay, you can only buy 1 box. So the friends decide to pool in $10 each, right, to equal $40 to get this box of 12 chocolates. Now, based on their contribution, they each receive 3 chocolates of that box, right? Or you can call them 3 units, if you will, if equated to mutual funds. Now, how do you calculate the cost of 1 unit or 1 chocolate? You simply divide the total amount with the total number of chocolates. If you all decided not to eat the chocolate, right, or sell the chocolate, and that company became famous, the chocolate became famous, and now that chocolate was worth 10 times the price, so maybe now you decided not to eat it, and all of a sudden this box of chocolates was worth $400 a box. Now you could sell those 3 chocolates that you have for not $10, but $100. So you made 10 times your profits because this box of chocolates that you went in on, pooled your money to get, now has increased tenfold in value. Does that make sense? That's basically just what mutual funds are. So when you're buying mutual funds, you're just buying a giant box of chocolates that all of us are also buying and hoping that the company that owns that box of chocolates or all the different companies in there are increasing in value over time, playing the long game, and then selling your chocolates at a higher price and taking that money and using it to retire, right? Make sense? Okay, so there are two types of mutual funds that you need to know about. Active mutual funds or actively managed mutual funds and passive mutual funds. And here are the differences because they're notable. So let's consider them. So let me explain actively managed mutual funds. Okay, this simply means that a financial advisor, a human being, is picking out your funds and actively managing them. Because active management relies on the expertise and intuition of human managers, you basically have to pay their salary and a higher internal cost for your fund because it costs more to manage it. Now, don't be fooled. Active managers are often covered in a sensational way by the press because everyone likes a hero. We're quick to talk about the wins. But don't let a few winners convince you that this is always the best strategy. So, in his book, The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel writes this: 85% of active mutual funds underperformed their benchmark over 10 years, ending in 2018. That figure has been fairly stable for generations. Now, you would think an industry with such poor performance would be a niche service and have a hard time staying in business, but there's almost $5 trillion invested in these funds. So when we're investing in something, we want to believe that it will work, right? There's a psychological effect in here. When you're invested, you're like, you got rose-colored glasses. You're always looking for this thing to work. Psychologically, we begin to twist what we perceive as reality to fit the narrative that we want to play out. This is true for all investments. So another bit of information here. According to Morningstar, half of all U.S. active mutual fund portfolio managers do not invest a cent of their own money in their own funds. That's crazy. With actively managed mutual funds, you have to pay someone a fee to manage them. But why are expenses, why is this significant? Why is it a big deal? Why can't we just pay them a little bit of money? Because you got to remember, you're playing the long game here, right? Because the percentages really destroy your return on your investment over time. So for example, an actively managed fund could range anywhere between 0.5% or even as high as 2%. Okay, so then you add in inflation, which since 2000, over 23 years, the average inflation rate has been 2.49%, even more over the past couple of years. So your investments that may have made an 8% return, but you have actively managed mutual funds that have high expense ratios, you could potentially see only 3.5% of that investment instead of 8% because of the fact that of inflation, and then your managers are taking a cut. That amount of variance over 30 years equates to hundreds of thousands of dollars of loss in order to pay someone else to manage your funds who, statistically speaking, will only win with your money 25% of the time. So using these guys to manage your funds only works 1 out of 4 times. When you think about it that way, it sounds kind of crazy. Sidebar, if you are thinking about this and want to know more about it, I really advise that you listen to the book Psychology of Money that I've been referencing by Morgan Housel, because it's such a fantastic book that will help you contextualize and explain all this stuff for you. Okay, so that's actively managed mutual funds. I hope by now you're hearing that maybe that's not the best strategy, but it's important to understand it to know where your money's going. The alternative is passive mutual funds. Now, passive mutual funds is what it sounds like. It's passively managed. So what's the upside? Well, there are no management decisions involved. Passively managed mutual funds should have very low internal costs because most of the selection is done by a computer. This means that your investments, this means that if your investments make an 8% return yearly, then you actually get most of that. Now, here are some pros to having passively managed funds in your investment portfolio. Like I said, the first one obviously is ultra low fees. There's nobody picking your stocks and your plan. So oversight is much less expensive. Passive funds simply follow the index and they use that as their benchmark. Transparency. It's always clear which assets are in your index fund. There's nobody trying to hide it from you. Tax efficiency. The buy and hold strategy doesn't typically result in a massive capital gain tax for the year. A good example of a passively managed fund is an ETF or an index fund. You've heard me reference the index fund earlier. Now, under this idea of passively managed mutual funds, we're going to talk about these two, like I just said, ETFs and index funds, okay? Now, if you want more information on the difference between passive and active investment funds, I'm going to put another link below from Investopedia that really explains the difference in the two. An ETF is short for exchange traded fund. And on its most simple level, an ETF is, like a mutual fund, is a basket of securities, stocks, bonds, etc. An ETF allows you to have multiple assets in one grouping, which makes it more diverse, more safe, more affordable. And in simple terms, it's a pie that's made up of small slices of pies from a bunch of other companies. It's also passively managed, so you only pay a fraction of the expense fees. So an ETF is a good example of a passive fund worth buying, right? Index funds. This is the alpha of all investment options, okay? The low-cost index fund. Warren Buffett, which is one of the most successful and famous investors of our time, has given this advice for years. He said this: if you invested in a very low-cost index fund where you don't put the money in at one time, but average in over 10 years, you'll do better than 90% of the people who start investing at the same time. It's called dollar cost averaging, buying little amounts over the course of a long time. Buffett said that at the 2004 Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. So what is it? Index funds are a type of mutual fund or an ETF. Like mutual funds, they have a portfolio of funds that are designed to track along with and mimic the movement of the index, which I explained earlier. Like mutual funds, they have a portfolio of funds that are designed to track along with and mimic the movement of the index it's associated with, hence the term index fund. And like I explained earlier, you can't invest in an index itself, but you can invest in an indexed fund. By doing this, you're not picking the individual stocks in an index, but a fraction of all of them. This way, you aren't trying to beat the stocks. Like I mentioned in the very beginning of the episode, you're trying to track with the index. If the whole S&P goes up, for example, you win, right? But then on the flip side, if 10 of the 500 companies in the S&P 500 go down, it's not that big of a deal because there's 490 that are still going up in value. There's subtle differences between ETFs and index funds, like how they are traded and when they are traded. But for the sake of this podcast episode, all you need to know is that for long-term investment strategies, either the ETF or the index fund is a low-risk, low-stress way to go. It's low cost and it's mostly automated, freeing you up for the things that need your time and attention, which is your family, okay? All right, so moving on from mutual funds, we're going to talk about something called the RRSP, or that's in Canada, or in the US if you're listening, it's a 401k in USA. There are subtle differences, but the principles are the same. So every time you hear 401k and you're Canadian, think RRSP, or if every time I say RRSP and you're listening from the States, think 401k, okay? So there's different types, but the RRSP is, like I said, the same as, very similar to the traditional 401k. Now, the 401k plan is a retirement savings and investment plan that employers offer for the most part, and then other companies offer it as well. A 401k plan gives employees a tax break on the money they contribute. Here's the automated easy part I was telling you about, right? So with a 401k, contributions are set up to automatically withdraw from employees' paychecks and invested in the funds of the employee's choosing from a list of available offerings. So in the case of a traditional 401k or an RRSP plan, the money that gets withdrawn from your account is not taxed. However, when you withdraw it at retirement, it will be taxed then. The taxes are deferred to when you're in retirement. This is what it means when someone says that their investments are tax deferred, okay? Either way, you're going to be taxed, but this is a convenient way for many young couples because they are able to contribute a larger lump sum in the beginning because it's not taxed, which will help in building a larger balance sooner, right? So while we're on this topic, another quick note, there is a limit to how much you can contribute annually. So when you're signing up, make sure you don't over contribute, but you can just Google like RRSP contribution limits 2024 and it'll tell you. The second part to this is a company matched 401k or company match RRSP, right? Also pre-tax. So some employers offer an incentive for you to invest by agreeing to match your contributions up to a certain limit. Many companies will match you up to like 6% of your contributions. So for example, if you make 10 grand a month and you sign up to contribute 6% and the company matches it, that's $600 from you and $600 from them. This is free money from your employer. I cannot overstate the significance of this, okay? If they didn't offer this option, you would have to invest 12% of your own money to match that amount. So if you aren't taking advantage of this option, stop what you're doing and call your HR rep to set it up. Listen, on top of that, there are excellent tax advantages to the 401k and RRSP as well, but we'll get into that later. But for now, just know that this is a great option available to you. And sidebar, while we're here, if you're listening to this and you have a bunch of consumer debt, pay that off first. I had this conversation with somebody just last week, and it does not make sense to do both at the same time. Take that money, get out of debt, and then use that new freed up income to dump on, to put in your RRSPs or 401ks, okay? Don't try and do both at the same time. You will be mediocre at both, which is not what you want. The next one is called a TFSA, or in the States, it's called Roth IRA. Now, this is post-tax, okay? Now, I feel like the banks have done a poor job at helping people understand the power of a Roth IRA or a TFSA. For years, I was under the impression that this was just kind of like a fancy savings account, like a savings account plus. But there's some amazing things about these accounts. So I want you to think about them as like a vehicle, okay? Or like a wrapper. So if I put $10,000 into a TFSA or a Roth IRA, and then I invest that money from the TFSA into mutual funds or stocks or ETFs or index funds, then the money that I make on that investment, i.e. the capital gains, like any money I make off of that will be all mine and I won't have to pay taxes on it, which is pretty incredible. I was already taxed on the money before I put it in because it's a tax-free savings account. So that's what I mean when I say post-tax. Now, why do I talk about taxes so much? Well, there's a few different reasons, right? So you can write off some of your income. So when you take your investments, you can write off portions of your income, which will lower your income on paper and get you into a lower tax bracket, meaning you're taxed on less of your income, meaning you pay less taxes, right? That's even a giant black hole there. And also tax rates change, right? So tax rates and law changes over time. So we have no idea what the tax rates will be in 20 years. So don't plan for today's rules, plan for the worst and protect yourself against having to pay taxes. So anytime you can pay taxes now, sweet, because you know what you paid, right? Who knows what it's going to be in 20 years from now. The next term I want to talk about is called a 529 plan or an RESP. 529 is the States, RESP is in Canada. Now, both of these are savings plans for your children to use if you want them to go to like a post-secondary school and pay for it. College, university, whatever. An RESP means Registered Education Savings Plan. Now, both of these are considered tax-sheltered accounts and will grow with interest over your child's life. Now, the really cool perk about this is that if your child doesn't use the fund within 36 years of the account being opened, the funds can then be returned or rolled into the rest of your retirement savings. Another cool advantage, especially of the RESP if you live in Canada, is that they are matched up to 20% by the federal government. Again, this is free money, okay? Now, however, the RESP is taxed upon deductions, where the 529 is paid with after-tax dollars and is not taxed upon withdrawal. But in any case, there's subtle differences. But if you have children, opening up a 529 plan or an RESP is kind of a no-brainer. Anytime the government's going to match your deposits, then just do it because it's free money, right? So that's it for some major terms. Trust me when I tell you, this is only scratching the surface. But for the sake of this episode, I picked out the things that are most important for the greatest number of people. Now, you don't need to know all the inner workings of the finance system. That's why we have professionals, right? But you do need to know enough to prepare for your retirement and to live a life of financial independence, right? You do need to know what can be done and how you can automate it and forget about it. And that can be done by leveraging the power of living debt-free and being generous, having an emergency fund, paying less taxes, having money to create experiences with your family, retiring with all the money that you would need by having RRSPs or 401ks, index funds, ETFs, or helping your kids with their education, by having a 529 plan or an RESP. These are great things to consider, and I'd really encourage you to dig into and start learning about, okay? Now, there are a bunch of other financial options like annuities, bonds, GICs, target date funds. Then there's also other types of investments like real estate, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. I have opinions about all those, but it really doesn't make sense to get into those right now. And I advise you to do your own research on that. But in the case that you do want to educate yourself more and dig even deeper into this, there is from the Business Insiders, they have an investment glossary that will help you define pretty much any financial acronym that you've ever seen or want to know about it. And I'll post that link in the show notes below, because it's super helpful to have. All right, know your enemy's language. Okay, those are some of the most important things to understand, and hopefully I've explained them well. Again, if you want more information, you can connect with me, reach out to me on Instagram, or you can email me. All that information is going to be available to you at the end of the episode. Move number 3 is going to be to multiply your troops. Okay, now this is the power of compounding. This is such a huge concept, you guys. And we've probably loosely all heard of the power of compounding, but I'm really going to break it down with you and make it a little bit more palpable for you. The most intelligent investors understand the concept of compounding interest, right? Albert Einstein once called it the most important invention in all of human history. That's crazy. In order to give you a more tangible understanding of the power of compounding, let me give you a scenario. Okay, we're going to talk about 2 brothers named Jason and Wayne. I don't know why I use these names, but they're names. Here we are. Now, 2 brothers, Jason and Wayne, they've both just turned 65, and they're both about to retire. Now, Jason got a jump start on his brother Wayne by opening a retirement account at 20 years old. And Jason started investing $4,000 for the next 20 years. But then at 40 years old, he quit depositing money in and then just let that money grow in a tax-free environment at a rate of 10% each year. So it was 20 years of deposits, and he stopped at age 40. Now, Wayne didn't start investing until he was 40 years old. Now, unlike his brother, Wayne invested $4,000 annually, also with a 10% return and tax-free, but he kept depositing money until retirement, which would be for 25 years. So Jason the first brother invested $80,000 over 20 years, then stopped. Wayne, the late bloomer, only started at 40 years old, and he invested over $100,000 over 25 years. Which brother do you think had the most money at retirement? Jason. The brother who invested $20,000 less money got over 600% more because of the extra 20 years he had to let his money grow and compound. What was the total retirement fund? Jason's total retirement fund was $2.5 million. Wayne's total retirement, the second brother, his total retirement fund was $400,000. Isn't that crazy? A difference of $400,000 to $2.5 million when Jason actually invested $20,000 less, but he did it 20 years before. So the power of time and compounding is incredible. Your yearly savings and your income will never bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be. In other words, you cannot save your way to the wealth you need to retire well. you need to invest it. You need to leverage the power of compounding. All right, so another tip here is to pay yourself first. Okay, pay yourself first. My wife and I do not compromise on what portion of our monthly income gets invested. Even when we take vacation and have large expenses and all those things, we do it within the amount of money that we have left over after we invest and after we give to our favorite charities. More on this later. But early on in our marriage, after we set up our investment accounts and our automatic deposits, anytime we should get worried about how much something was going to cost, we would remind each other, hey, if we did nothing else than what we're doing right now, we're going to be multimillionaires when we retire. Because we knew it was set, it was automated. All we had to just do is just let it keep happening. And then whatever money we had left over, that's just what we live on. And there's something that's super comforting about that reminder, right? That if we did nothing else, we'd be good. We set up our accounts, we automated our savings and investments, and then all we had to do was just live our lives and our future was secure. Have you ever felt that kind of peace? To confidently know what your future selves would be able to retire, vacation and travel, buy presents for family members, bless others, all that stuff. It is such a good feeling. All right, sound good? Let's move on to number 4, stick to the battle plan. Okay, listen, smart investing isn't sexy. You have to learn to betroth the boring. Just like building a great body, just like building great relationships, it's very simple, but you have to be consistent in what you do and stay focused on that one goal. It just takes reps, hundreds and thousands of reps. So for example, in the context of fitness, if a person wants to lose weight, instead of consistently maintaining a calorie deficit or working out every day, they get distracted by fad diets and programs that are designed to grab their attention. These are programs like, the Insanity program or 75 Hard or doing keto or Atkins diets and all those different things. And they just jump from thing to thing, and they always just get distracted by having the newest, the best branded, pre-workout or supplements or chasing down the new fat burner pill. When if all they did was just simply be in a caloric deficit and move their body once a day. Like, simplify it. It's not sexy. It's super boring, but that's what it takes. Finances is no different. Relationships, right? We constantly look for quick hacks or new ideas for our marriages or our other key relationships that we're trying to build. But all we need to do is just practice consistently showing up and loving these people. And over time, the relationship matures and grows into a beautiful thing. Instead of, we try all these over-the-top gestures and fancy gifts, and we spend money on these crazy trips trying to win people back and do all these things. And while these things can be helpful in the right context, they're really only sprinkles, on the sundae of relationships, if you will. But listen, over the course of your lifetime, there will be hundreds of new shiny toys, i.e. new investment opportunities that can distract you. Now, I'm not saying all these alternatives are always bad, but if they distract you from your goal of building a nest egg for retirement, yes, they are bad. Okay? So here's some examples of distractions or financial shiny objects that have come up as distractions for me over the course of the last decade, where there has been times where I thought, well, should I put money in here instead of saving for retirement? Or what should I do with that? Even things like really, really well-branded multi-level marketing programs, right? Cryptocurrency investments, day trading, real estate investments, the Robinhood app, selling on Amazon, flipping houses. These are all things that you could do, and a lot of people do, and they make good money at it. But you got to understand that that's not necessarily always the best. Not every good idea is a good idea for you. And not every idea or not every investment strategy is a good one. And so now, could you dig into those? Yeah, for sure, if you want. However, don't compromise what you're currently doing, your regular routine investments and savings, right? Listen, I've known many people who've done well in some of these different areas I mentioned. But here is a little tip for you. I've asked myself 3 questions when considering jumping into like a new side hustle or a potential flow of income. And so basically, in order for me to advance this idea down the road, I have to have a yes in all 3 of these questions. Number 1, will this bring peace? Number 2, will this bring passion? Number 3, will this bring profits? Okay, and if it's a yes to all 3, then I'll consider it. So peace. Listen, nothing in this life will come at the cost of my peace of mind. All right, I'm old enough now. If it's going to stress me out, I'm not doing it. If this new opportunity is going to keep me up at night, waking up in a cold sweat, whatever, I'm not going to do it. Number 2, is this going to bring me passion? I once wrote a quote that said, invest in your passion because it pays the best interest. And it is so true. Will you gain financially? Yes. But the bigger dividend it will pay is so much joy and fulfillment that you'll get from it. This comes from personal experience, as I've tried multiple streams of income and learned the hard way. If it's not fulfilling you, you're investing your time and money into something that you don't care about, it's not going to be fun for you. It's not going to be worth it. Even if you do make money at it, it's going to leave you feeling empty if it doesn't engage your passion, right? Third one, does this bring profits? Obviously, simple one. Will this supplement and speed up my plan to achieve financial independence? This is probably the most important question, right? But perhaps it could be asked like this. Will this slow down my journey to financial independence? And if whatever you want to pursue is going to take money from your automated process, your retirement fund or your nest egg, then this is an automatic and unequivocal no, okay? Will this bring profits on top of what I'm already doing? If that's a yes, consider it, okay? So that's the 3 questions when you want to consider, should I do this new thing? Will it bring peace? Will it bring passion? Will it bring profits? Hopefully that helps. Like I said, is investing in crypto bad? No, not necessarily. But if you're going to take out 50% of your 401k to buy Bitcoin and lose sleep every second of the night because of its volatility, no, then it's bad. It's not a good thing for you to do, okay? But if you've already automated your monthly investments and you have extra disposable income after everything been paid for that you want to play around with, that's a different story. So all I'm saying is getting distracted by all those different things, the new shiny object, the new financial hack, the get-rich-quick scheme, just like in fitness, or the new fad diet. Listen, this is just what we call majoring on the minors, and it's going to result in you wasting time and energy and ultimately spinning your wheels. Now, why am I saying all this? Because the process of personal growth, whether it's financially, relationally, emotionally, or spiritually, is notoriously unsexy, right? The problem is that no one wants to sell you that message. Doesn't make for good branding because it's boring. And I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but it's just reps, right? Thousands of reps. That is why so few people do it, because they get bored, okay? Whew, that has been a bunch. Okay, so now we're going to move on to number 5, okay, which is the last step, which is taking new territory, right? Now that you've learned what some of your best options are when it comes to investing into your future, I'm going to teach you how to automate the whole process so that you can focus your time and attention on the things that matter most in this life, which is your family, your relationships, and the life that you're creating. The world of personal finance can be really overwhelming because we're constantly being inundated with strategies and systems on how to get rich. Get rich quick, right? Or die trying. So rather than bomb you with all these different strategies and options, we're going to simplify things as much as possible by breaking them down into 4 categories. And these 4 areas will cover everything that you will need to focus on to give you peace of mind over the present and create a future that you can dream of for you and your family. Remember that all additional income on top of the regular monthly income should go into these buckets, okay? You have a yard sale, split up the money. It's a great way to teach your kids. You get some extra money from a side job, split up the money. Notice that there's no allowance for everyday expenses, though, when we talk about this. That's because I want you to pay into these 4 money buckets first, and 35%, and then you will live off the rest, which is your 65%. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I can't live off of 65% of my income, then you should seriously consider your living costs and consider your quality of living. Like, are you acting your wage? You know what I mean? Your biggest monthly expense should be your mortgage. And other than that, you should be free of big monthly payments like car payments and things like that. Because by now, hopefully you're debt free. Like I said, if not, skip back to the other one and get on that journey. So now before we jump into these financial 4 buckets, I just want to say at the end of the episode, I'm going to give you these 5 financial principles to live by that's going to help you make sure that you're living within and below your means. Don't miss these 5 tips at the end of the episode. So let's move into this. Your financial 4, your 4 money buckets, okay? You're going to, every single month, you're going to put money into these 4 areas. So number 1 is generosity. Now, I encourage you to take 10% of your income and give it away. Give it to others, okay? Now, not all financial advisors will tell you to give away 10% of your income. Remember the story of Scrooge, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, right? Well, that this story is a lot like how life actually goes. There are many financial reasons why giving back is advantageous, but even bigger than that, it's about what happens in the rest of our lives that's important. All right, there are 6 reasons why we should practice generosity. And man, there are so many studies here and that I documented that I wanted to share with you, but for the sake of time, I can't get into it. But maybe I'll actually put them in the show notes below because it's so interesting. But practicing generosity actually helps you live longer. Statistically speaking, people who give to charities and are generous live longer than people who don't give. There's been researches done by the Carnegie Mellon University found that people who volunteer, even their time, for example, generous with the time, for 4 hours per week are 40% less likely to develop high blood pressure than those who don't volunteer. How interesting is that? Practicing generosity fights depression. Practicing generosity brings you deep joy. Let's see. According to a study of researchers at Stony Brook University, you can get something called the giver's glow. When we're generous, our brain releases several chemicals like oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine that gives us a sense of joy and peace. So it really is better to give than to receive. How cool is that? It actually it affects us on a chemical level, which is really wild. Practicing generosity makes friends. Everybody loves the generous friend. Generosity is contagious, right? It makes us feel good. When we feel good, we're better at making those around us feel good. Practicing generosity makes you more content. Studies have shown that this is one of the areas where there has been a large chasm between high generosity and low generosity people. Of those in high generosity, 70% express satisfaction with their jobs. With those low in generosity, 49% had that same satisfaction. So cool. Practicing generosity changes your family for the better. As we learned, our children do what we say, not what we do. So when you retire and you're looking at the lives your kids are living as adults, would you be proud to see that they're living selfish lives and always putting themselves first? Of course not. You would want them to be generous. You would want them to give to others. You would want to be good people. And so the best way to do that is to model it for them. This is what's going to change your family. There are a ton of other financial reasons why it helps to give as well. Like, for example, in Canada, if you make a donation to a registered charity and you receive a tax receipt for your donation, your receipt can then be submitted with your annual tax return to receive a tax credit of up to 53% of your donation. And there's more tax advantages to giving that I don't have time to get into, like donating your depreciated securities and other things. But just know that for now, it's important to be generous, not just financially, but relationally, emotionally, and spiritually. Okay. All right, the first bucket is generosity, 10%. The second bucket is going to be fun, your fun bucket. That's 10%. And if you're anything like me, you can become hyper-focused and you can get tunnel vision. And when we cement these great practices around paying down our debt, saving money, and investing, we can fall into the trap of forgetting the real reason for the money in the first place, right? Is to enjoy it by using it to create experiences with our loved ones. And it could be anything from going for a walk to the ice cream store or taking a trip to Disneyland. But you must remember that not everything is a financial investment. And in many cases, you should be using your money as a relational investment. And so to be able to have money, to be able to have that 10%, to pay into experiences is so valuable. Not all investments are financial, right? So don't get caught up into the trap of pinching every penny and becoming the Scrooge of your family. The whole point of this money game is to be able to use it to your advantage. And so in some cases, this is what it looks like. So like I said, how do you do it? You automate it. Set up a recurring transfer once a month or once a paycheck to set up 10% of your net income to your fun bucket. And for example, if your net pay is $5,000 a month, transfer $500 every month. Now, does this seem high? Maybe, but it's designed to be that way because it's also going to be your savings funds for your vacations when it comes time to going camping or, taking a flight to go somewhere or just buying ice cream down the street. You'll always have the money you need. Okay. Now, the last bucket is your long-term bucket. Okay, this is going to be where you save 15% of your income. And this is going to be based around your investments and your retirement planning. We allot 15% of all household income. That doesn't mean 15% of your income. If your wife works, it's 15% of her income and 15% of your income. It's 15% of your total house income. And as we discussed, the safest and the simplest way to do this is by doing the following. Take advantage of any 401k or RRSP plan that is available to you. And if your company matches contributions, if you have a company matched one, invest up to the match. So if your company matches 3%, certainly match up to 3% for sure. Okay? Then you can open up a TFSA account or a Roth IRA and begin purchasing low-cost ETFs or index funds through that. And then if it's a value to you, you should consider opening up a RESP or 529 plan for your children and making small contributions monthly. Now, why do you do that after saving for your retirement? Well, it's simple. Your kids may not go to college, but you will certainly have to retire. So let's take care of that first, okay? And then after you've got that 15%, you're set up, and these are automatic payments you're making. Don't set them up to automate it, and talk to a financial advisor on how to do that with your banking system, and just forget about it. Then after your RESP or your 529 plan, if you have any extra income after that, after your fund bucket, your generosity bucket, then any extra income should be going towards paying down your mortgage, because that is such a huge payment that if you can free up, again, it frees up way more earning power, income power. So the fourth bucket is your short-term bucket, which is your emergency fund. Now, I didn't allot a percentage to that because it's assumed that you already have an emergency fund that's in place that is 3 to 6 months expenses. Now, if you withdraw from that bucket for an emergency, pause everything else until you can fill that bucket back up and then resume your savings and investments kind of thing. Does that make sense? So in total, you've got the 4 buckets. You've got your giving bucket, your generosity bucket, which is 10%, your fund bucket, which is 10%, and then your long-term investments, which is 15%, and then your short-term or your emergency fund bucket, which is obviously is already fully stocked up. So that's total of 35% of your monthly income should be accounted for. That leaves you with 65% of your income to live on. Remember, just going back to the whole tax question, your contributions to your investments can be written off against your yearly income, significantly reducing the amount of taxes you pay every year. If you combine that with the tax breaks of being generous and giving away 10% of your income, it gives you an incredible amount of tax savings. So that's another huge advantage, okay? So now we're left with 65% of our income. This is kind of where you want to be. You want to be living on most 65% of your income. Now I'm going to teach you these 5 money principles that you can use that will help make sure you are acting your wage and you're living within this 65% margin. Okay. So the number one principle that we use, and I think Dave Ramsey uses this as well, but it's the mortgage payment rule. So if you haven't bought a home yet, one fantastic principle is to make sure that your monthly mortgage payment is no more than 25% of your net monthly income, okay? So for example, if your monthly income, your household income is 10 grand, then your mortgage should not be over $2,500 a month. Why? Because this is likely the largest and most long-term payment you will have for your entire life, or a bunch of your life. And if it's too high, it's going to crush your ability to save and invest in your retirement. This can either make or break your future. Have you ever heard of the term being house poor? This is what it means, right? You bought way too expensive and your mortgage is sucking up all your hard-earned money every month. And if you've already bought over that 25% rule, you can refinance your mortgage for a lower rate and potentially extend the date of your mortgage, or even sell your home and downsize to free up some funds to start investing and saving. Number one principle. Number two is the car value rule, okay? This rule is going to sting for some of you. I know it does for me because I'm a car guy. But the rule is that you should spend no more than 35% of your annual salary on a vehicle. So if you bring home $100 grand a year, you should be buying a vehicle that's worth no more than $35,000. If you make $50,000 a year, you should be buying a vehicle that's worth no more than $17,500, right? Now, there are different variations in percentages allotted for this, ranging from 10% all the way to 50%. And I've heard a lot of different people talk about it with different percentages. But I used to be a mechanic. I used to crank wrenches for a living. And so I do recognize the importance of spending some money to avoid purchasing a total lemon or a death trap for like $300. So we don't want to do that. But I think 50% is kind of too high. So this is why I've settled, for me personally, I believe 35% is kind of a sweet spot. And for the same reason as your mortgage, this is going to help you avoid being crippled by the debt and having all your earning power seized by monthly car payments. So your mortgages, your car payments, and your student loans are huge financial burdens on North Americans. And this can easily be reduced by some principles that I'm teaching you, right? So keep that one in mind. You should spend no more than 35% of your annual salary on a vehicle. Number 3, don't buy an iPhone, buy Apple. So don't buy from companies, buy the companies, right? The key to wealth is ownership. Listen, the 3 pillars of the wealthy are stocks, business, and real estate. So buy stocks in the things that you love. So for example, if you can't wait for the next iPhone to be released, chances are you're one of millions of people who also can't wait. What does that mean? That this company is going to go up in value. So instead of buying the newest iPhone, just buy more Apple stock, right? Because that's going to pay massive dividends instead of buying a phone that's going to depreciate in value. Instead of buying the new Nike sneakers, buy Nike stock. That way, when you're spending money, that money is always going to pay you back instead of buying more depreciating junk, right? You're always thinking about, how will this money come back to me? What's going to be my return on investment? Number 4, if you can't buy it twice, you can't afford it, okay? Now, there are lots of versions of this. Jay-Z was famous for saying it this way. Dave Ramsey says, if you can't buy it in cash, you can't afford it. I like Jay-Z's better version because it ensures that you will live within your means. My wife and I don't buy anything on credit, right? We refuse to have monthly payments outside of our mortgage and essentials like insurance, electricity. But this is why we're able to save and give and invest so much of our monthly income, because we just don't buy things on credit. We just pay for everything in cash. Going on a vacation in the summer to Portugal, paying for that in cash. I have an eye surgery in a few days, paying for that in cash. All that, because that's just the way we live. And it's so much better on your marriage, your mindset, as a parent, everything. The last principle, which is probably the most practical, real one, is this. If you want to buy it, give it 24 hours. We are incredibly emotional, visual, and impulsive buyers. And marketing agencies know that. And believe me, they capitalize on it. Take 1 or 2 classes in a marketing or sales course, and you'll learn how to use tactics to really create perceived scarcity, time sensitivity, to play on your emotions and to make you want to purchase and I feel like you need to purchase. But here's my rule of thumb, okay? If I find myself getting worked up while I'm scrolling at something I want to buy, or I find something on Amazon or whatever, if I really want something, I'm going to pause, I'm going to take a breath, I'm going to walk away. And I make a deal that I won't purchase that thing for at least 24 hours. And after sleeping on it and talking to my wife about it or thinking about it for a full day, if I still feel like this is a no-brainer, then I'll consider making the purchase. But that rule in itself has been so helpful in getting me out of the trap of impulsively purchasing. Woof. Okay, there you have it, the 5 money principles to live by. Make sure your mortgage payment is within 25% of your income. Make sure your the car value rule at 35%. Don't buy an iPhone, buy Apple, right? Don't buy the product, buy the stock. If you can't buy it twice, you can't afford it. And if you want to buy it, give it 24 hours. Those are 5 things that have never led me astray, my friends. So in conclusion, we're here. I don't know how long this has been. I certainly hope it's been within 60 minutes. If it's not, I'm sorry. But this is important, you guys, okay? So in summary, let's back out and look at the whole field here. We're going to observe the entire battle plan over the last 2 episodes, okay? Here's is your step-by-step playbook that will guarantee your financial success and freedom. Okay, we've learned how to play financial defense. We've chosen our battle, which is we've identified our wants and needs. We've identified our enemy, which means we've documented our debts and our expenses. We've drafted our battle plan, which means we've just prioritized our debts and in order in which to pay off first. We've defended our home base, which really just means we've drafted our first small, or we funded our first small emergency fund. We've expanded our armory, which is the optional step, 4B, which means to create additional streams of income if you have the ability to. We have number 5. We've taken back our land, paid off all of our consumer debts, okay, except our mortgage. And then lastly, we fortified our walls, which we've created our step 2 version of our emergency fund, which is fully funded, which is 3 to 6 months of expenses. Then, once we were out of debt and then fully stacked and ready to go and defended, we went into playing offense financially, which we started to visualize a victory, thinking about how much money we need to retire to live the life we want by using an online retirement calculator. We've learned the enemy's language. So we've learned to understand and identify key financial terms like stocks, stock indexes, mutual funds, index funds, ETFs, all that stuff. We've multiplied our troops, which is a new one, to take advantage of the power of compounding interest. Then we stick to the battle plan, okay? We betroth the boring and we avoid get-rich-quick schemes. We avoid shiny new objects and we stick to what we know. And remember those 3 things. Does this bring me peace? Does this bring me profit? And does this bring me passion? Okay. And then lastly, we take new territory. We've talked about these these 4 money buckets. Do these 4 things and automate them, simplify them, and never have to think about them again. That's 10% into our giving bucket, 10% into our fund bucket, and then having our short-term savings bucket, which is our emergency fund, and 15% into our long-term investments like RRSPs, 401ks, TFSAs, Roth IRAs, all those different things. I promise you, my friend, if you continue to live by these rules and principles I've taught you, it will prevent you from living beyond your means and making impulsive decisions and purchases. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, this is so overwhelming, you've talked about so much, I still can't even wrap my head around it all. Listen, don't worry. Connect with me. Like I said, you can reach out to me. My email is mitchell@dadnationco.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram. Just DM me. My handle is @dadnationco. And I do coaching. I do coaching in fitness and finances and our mindset focus and our family, like relationship stuff with our kids. All that. I mean, you can find it all on Instagram, or you can go to the website, dadnationco.com. You can see a list of my services. I got free curriculum up there. Got a bunch of stuff for you guys. But listen, I'm here to help anyway, whether it's free or whether it's paid. Just contact me and we can have that conversation to see how I can serve you and help you on this journey to creating the future that you have always dreamed of for you and your family. Okay, some questions for you guys, right? And if you're watching on YouTube, post a comment below. I want to know, like, what of these things do you struggle with the most? Which of these steps are you currently doing, or are you doing them out of order? Of all of these steps in the plan, which resonated with you the most? And perhaps the most important question for you is, what steps do you need to take action on today? Okay. If you're listening to this and you're married and you got kids or whatever, I want you to have a conversation with your wife about what it's going to look like for you to start taking action today if you're not in the place where you want to be financially. Okay, listen, that's all for me. This has been a giant mouthful. It's been a huge episode. Thank you. If you're still here, thank you so much for listening. You are incredible. Check out the show notes for all the links to the studies and the different things I've referenced in the episode. But before you go, I want to just do a little plug for my episode next week. It's going to be with Tanner Clark. And if you have kids, you do not want to miss this episode. We're going to be talking about tech and teens, okay? This guy is a international speaker. He speaks to high schools. He speaks with parents. We're going to be talking about the dangers of technology. We're going to be talking about what apps to avoid, how to introduce tech to your kids, when to introduce tech to your kids. And maybe you've already given them a smartphone and you just don't like how it's gone down, and you just got to reel your kids back and take it away, and you're not really sure what to do about it. He's going to give you tips on how to do that. We're going to talk about all your options as a parent. He's an incredible source of information, and you're going to love this episode. If you have kids and you have questions around technology, do not miss it, my friend. Listen, I'm here for you always. Reach out to me if you need support in any of the ways that we discussed. You know what I love to talk about, and I'm here to help you, like I said, in any way. So listen, I'm in your corner, here for you. I believe in you. I believe in your marriage. Let's get after it. We'll see you next week.